In this video, we're going to be talking about indexing images. We're also going to talk about some basic manipulations that you can do with images easily through just indexing rows and columns. So let's go over the basic syntax for indexing an image. So we already talked about an image is just this three-dimensional array, right? So now we have rows, we have columns, and we also have layers. So therefore, when we're indexing images, we now have this new component to consider, and that's our layers. And so if I had an image that I had already read in, so we talked about this in the last video. So if I had an image is imread, and let's say with some file name, I don't know, I'm just going to say file name. So now I have image, img, which is this three-dimensional array, okay? And it's also the class of it is uint8. And so if I wanted to index this image in order to index certain parts out of it, the syntax for doing that is, so it's still the same image, so it's still the same name of what you want to index, and the first thing you give it are your rows, the second is your columns, and then now this is the new thing, we tell it the layers. So I'll write that out, layers. Okay? And so now when we're dealing with images, we have to account for this. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to get out the first, all the rows and all the columns of the first layer of my image, right? So that would just be my red layer. In that case there, I could say red, or just R, is my image. I want all the rows, so I'm using colon, all the columns, colon, and then now for the layers, if I just want the first one, I can just put a 1. So now inside of R, this is a one-layered array of just my red values that I had in my image. If I wanted to get out, let's say, the first row, but of all of my layers, right? So I have a 3-layered array. I can say first row, so let's call it row 1. That's a 1. Will be my image. So I want the first row. I want all the columns. And if I want it to be like my entire image, right? So every layer, so my red, green, and my blue layer, I then will say all of my layers. So that's just the basics that you need to know in terms of indexing, right? So the syntax now includes this whole layer dimension that you have to account for. So now let's do an example, right? So let's say I wanted to do some basic manipulations to an image that I have saved. And so I have the image serena.jpg saved. And so let's go ahead and read that in using imread. So serena.jpg. And if I were to show this image, so show image, let's just go ahead and run this. Right, so this is the picture that I'm dealing with here, right? A beautiful, beautiful picture of the majestic tennis player that she is. But anyways, so let's say, so this is the original picture. And let's say I wanted to flip this picture horizontally, meaning that I want the left part to become the right part, right? So how her hair is kind of pointing to the left over there, I want to flip it across the or flip it horizontally such that that's pointed to the right. And so essentially what I'm doing there is I would be reversing my columns, right? I would be keeping all of my rows the same, but reversing my columns. And I'm also just keeping my layers the same as well. So what that looks like in code is, so if I have flip horizontal, that'll be my image. And I still want all of my rows the same. But however, I want my columns backwards. So I would index this from the end in steps of -1 to the 1 to the first one. And then for my layers, I want all of my layers. So therefore, I'll just use colon for that. And so if I were to show this one, so this is flip horizontal, and if we were to run this, let's see if it shows up. Boom, right? So in this case here, right, notice how I flipped my image. And just so that we can have both of them up at the same time, I'm just going to put figure. Let's close all, and let's run this again. Right, so the one on the left was my original one, and now the one on the right is the one that I have flipped horizontally. And lo and behold, Serena looks beautiful from all angles. But moving on, so let's say I wanted to flip this vertically, right? So I flip this horizontally, and let's say I wanted to flip this vertically. It'll be the same type of concept, but I would be reversing my rows instead. So flip vert will be my image, and then now I want my rows backwards. So end -1 to 1. I want my columns to be the same, and then my layers, I want all those to be the same as well. So I want all of them. So let's do figure again, and let's do IamShow flip Bert. Let's suppress everything, and let's run this. Boom, boom. Oh my goodness, right? So then Serena has been flipped upside down now, right? And so we did that by reversing the columns. And so these are basic manipulations that you can do that we talked about with just basic arrays and like vectors as well, that now still apply to images. However, you're doing stuff to pictures, which is kind of cool, I'd say. And that's it. So the idea of slicing is just the same thing as indexing, but instead of indexing just one row, one layer, something like that, we're going to be indexing chunks of our image or chunks of our arrays, right? And so we talked about this when we talked about arrays. So let's say, oh, let me be an artist. Let me say I had a beautiful picture here. Let's say there was some grass. Ooh, let's say that there was a flower. Oh man. What color should it be? Let's do a red flower. Oh my goodness. Wow. You know, actually, let's add some yellow in there too. Oh, wow. Okay. Actually, let's put some clouds in the sky. Okay, so you've just witnessed a masterpiece. But, right, so if I have this picture, and let's say that I wanted to index the left half of the image, right? So I just wanted... let's do this in like blue, right? So let's say I just wanted this left half here, right? I can do that through indexing large chunks, right? So I can index just that part. And so that's what we call slicing. And so we've talked about this with arrays, but just really quickly, right? So if I were to look at the left half, this would be my image, and I want all the rows, right? So I want all the rows. However, the columns that I want are the first half of the columns. And so for making this problem easier, let's just assume that there's an even number of rows and columns. And so if I wanted the first half, I can just start at the first column, go in steps of 1 until the end divided by 2 column. And in the rows, not the rows, the layers that I want all the layers. So I'll just put a colon there as well, right? And so right there, I now have the left half of my array, or my image. And so with slicing, you need to be able to index all the different parts of an image, right? So the left half, the right half, the top half, the bottom half, and then also all 4 quadrants of your picture or your array. And so let's quickly go over how to do all of those. So that's my left half, and so my right half, so that'll be all of my rows, and then my columns here, I want the second half of my columns, so that's going to be the end divided by 2 plus 1 to the end, and the layers that I want are all the layers, okay? Now the top half, this is going to be similar to what we did, but now we're going to like interchange how we indexed our rows and our columns. So the top half will be the first half of my rows, and then all of my columns and all of my layers. The bottom half will be the second half of my rows, so n divided by 2 plus 1 to the end. All of my columns, all of my layers, right? And then we have all 4 quadrants. So now I'm about to write out a whole bunch of stuff. So let's say the top left. So top left, right? The top left, so that is, so if I were to split this again in half this way, that's perfectly in half, just in case you were wondering. The top left would be this part over here, right? This square or rectangle. And so if I wanted to do that, that's going to be the first half of my rows, first half of my columns. So that's 1 to the n divided by 2. And then also my columns, 1 to the n divided by 2. And then I want all of my layers. So let's continue. So let's say top right. I feel like I'm going to run out of room. That's fine. The top right will be the first half of my rows, second half of my columns. So first half of my rows, n divided by 2, second half of my column, so n divided by 2 plus 1 to the end, and then all of my layers. Where am I going to write? We'll move up here. And so now let's go to the bottom left. So bottom left. Right, so this will be the second half of my rows, first half of my columns. So that's my image. So second half of my rows, so n divided by 2 plus 1 to the end. Oh no, I'm going to run out of room. And then the columns are the first half, so 1 to the end divided by 2. Then I want all of my layers. Oh, we're cutting it close. We are cutting it close. And then the bottom right, I'll move this over. Bottom right will be second half of my rows, second half of my columns. So image, oh gosh, this is so much writing. And then second half of my columns. Oh gosh. Oh no. Oh no. We have run out of room. I'm just gonna move down here. And then my layers, oh, this is poorly done. But hopefully you get the idea, right? So slicing is just taking out all these large chunks. And you should be able to know how to do all of these types of indexing. And on the next slide, we will do an example where we do some cool stuff with Serena's picture again. So in this example here, what I want to do is I want to take our picture of Serena and I want to interchange the top half and the bottom half, right? So once again, if I had, or just to see the picture we're working with, because it is really just a beautiful picture. So I have this picture of Serena, and I want to take the top half and put it on the bottom half, and put the bottom half and put it on the top half. So in order to do this, first, let's index the top half. So the top half will be my image, and I want the first half of the rows, 1 to the n divided by 2. And so, by the way, we can do this because if we look over here, our number of rows is even and our number of columns is even. So we don't have to deal with any decimal issues with indexing or dividing by 2. And so I have the first half of my rows, I want all the columns, then I want all the layers. And then my bottom half is my image, and I want the second half of the rows. So end divided by 2 plus 1 to the end, and then I want all of my all of my columns and all of my layers. And now what I can do is, in order to swap them, so let's call it swapped, is I can just concatenate these vertically on top of each other, but the bottom one first and then the top one. So I can say my bottom half and then vertically concatenate that with the top half. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So let's go ahead and figure then I am show swapped. And so if I were to run this, right? So in this case here, oh, go away. So in this case here, right, I had the original image, which was this, and then I took the top half, put it on the bottom, took the bottom half, put it on the top, right? And so this is just slicing, taking off different chunks of my image and doing some manipulations and all that crazy stuff. Oh my gosh, actually for fun, right? What if we interchange the top and bottom half, but then let's say that I also flipped this top half just so that like her hand and stuff is being pointed down. So what I can do there is my top half, I'm still going to index it, right, that way, but then let's go ahead and reverse our top half as well, reverse or flip it horizontally. Or flip it vertically. So top half, not half, top half. Image is top, actually it's top half. And let's flip this, so let's flip the rows. So end -1 to 1. Keep all the rows, or keep all the columns, keep all the layers. And let's run this, let's see what this looks like. Right, so in this case here, right, so now it's kind of looks funny. But all this is just slicing and indexing, and we're doing cool and fun stuff with images. So the last topic we're going to talk about in the basics of image manipulation is resizing. And so resizing is just changing like the dimensions, the number of rows and the number of columns that you have. And luckily there is a function that makes this a lot easier, and it is well named. It is called IM resize. right? And so I am resize, what this takes in is this takes in as the first input your image array, right? So that you've already read in. And then it takes in a vector that represents your new number of rows that you want and the new number of columns that you want, right? So in this case, it takes in a vector that will be new rows, new columns. And what this outputs is your new image that'll have these new dimensions, right? So for instance, let's say I had an image, right? So let's say, oh, I'm about to be an artist again. I had this image of a smiley face that looked like this. And let's say I wanted to smush it. Let's say I wanted to smush it in terms of the rows. Let's make it half the rows, right? This, so it's like something like that, right? I'm resizing, I'm causing it to have half the number of rows that it originally had. And so let's think about how this would happen. So if in my I am resize, so I am resize for this, it takes in the image, I need to have the new number of rows and the new number of columns. However, the new number of rows and new number of columns depends on the original number of rows and the original number of columns, right? So in this case here, it would be useful if I figured those out first. So I can do that using the size function. So the size function now has three outputs. It's the rows, columns, and then the number of layers. And it takes in my image. And so now the new number of rows that I want will be, and let's assume that there's an even number of rows and columns, will be my R divided by 2. And the new number of columns that I want will be the same as the original. So I'll just keep that as C. And then so in this case here, I get back this new image, and it'll be a nice smushed version. And we'll do an actual example with this on the next slide. All right, so now let's say we wanted to make a nice little mosaic to pay homage to the goddess that is Serena Williams, just by resizing some images and putting them all back together to make a new image. And so the first thing is we want on the top left, we want the top left to be just the original image. Okay. In the bottom left, we want to be the same image, but to have double the number of rows. And so in order to do that, first, let's figure out how many rows and columns we have. And so we have to include the layers when we're using the size function, because if we don't include the layers, then it takes your columns and it multiplies it by the number of layers. So in this case here, if I didn't have this layers here, my columns would be 3 times the actual amount. And so it's always done this. The size function has not changed. It has always done this. It's just that when we talked about arrays, or like normal arrays, it was just one layer. So it was multiplying the number of columns by the layers. Let's go ahead and just put that L there. And so now I want to create a rows that are doubled. So let's go ahead and I am resize that. I am resize, what is an image? And the new number of rows that I want are my old number of rows times 2. And then I still want my same number of columns. Okay, and then also that's going to be like the bottom left. And then we want the entire right side of our picture to be 3 times the number of rows, right? Because this has to match the number of rows of the original one plus the plus this new resized one that has 2 times the number of rows. But then we also want 6 times the number of columns. So I'm just going to call this row 3 col 6. Beautiful variable name. So I am resize. My original image, and I want it to have the number of rows times 3 and the number of columns times 6. So now we have all the parts, and now we can put them all together in order to finish our mosaic. So let's say, so the left half, right? So the left half here will be my original image, so image, stacked on top of my image with the double number of rows, but the same number of columns, right? In order to vertically concatenate things, you have to have the same number of columns. And then, so my new image in this case here will be, so my left half concatenated with this entire right half, and the right half will be my image that has 3 times the number of rows and 6 times the number of columns. So we'll do row 3, col 6, that's what we had done. And so now, if we were to I am show new image, if I can type correctly, let's run. And boom, right? Look at that, isn't that beautiful, right? So in the top left over here, we have our original image, right, that had our original dimensions. Then down here, we had stretched the number of rows, right? And over here on the right-hand side, we had stretched the number of rows and stretched the number of columns, right? And so then now we have a beautiful mosaic that we can dedicate to our Savior, Serena Williams. And yeah, so this is just an example of how you can resize some stuff in order to do some cool things.